My husband threw me off a cliff for his mistress. Goodbye, darling. The company is ours now. I survived on the rocks, disfigured. That gravelly voice, those 3 words, would become his confession.
Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching.
The Pacific Ocean was supposed to be my grave. Marcus had chosen the spot carefully, a remote overlook on Highway 1, just south of Half Moon Bay. We'd stopped there 100 times during our marriage, watching the sunset, talking about the company we'd built together. He knew exactly how far down the rocks were, 300 feet of jagged granite and freezing water. He kissed me first. That's what I remember most. He kissed me on the forehead, the way he used to when we were young and still believed in each other. Then he put both hands on my shoulders and pushed. I didn't scream. I was too surprised to scream. 23 years of marriage, and in that final moment, all I felt was confusion. This couldn't be happening. Marcus loved me. Marcus needed me. I was the one who'd built the financial systems, the one who'd made Reed Maritime Technologies profitable. Without me, he was just a salesman with expensive taste. The fall took approximately 4 seconds. I know this because I counted. 1, I saw his face getting smaller. 2, I felt the wind tear at my clothes. 3, I heard Stephanie laughing somewhere above me, high and bright like champagne bubbles. 4, I hit the rocks. The impact should have killed me. It would have killed me if I'd landed 6 inches to the left. Instead, I hit a shelf of granite that jutted out from the cliff face, breaking my fall just enough to keep my spine intact. My face wasn't so lucky. My right cheekbone shattered on impact. My jaw dislocated. A piece of rock sliced through my temple to my ear. I felt the blood before I felt the pain. I lay there in the dark, waves crashing somewhere below, and I listened to Marcus and Stephanie drive away. Their voices carried on the wind, fragments of conversation I shouldn't have been alive to hear. Are you sure she's dead? 300 feet onto rocks? She's dead. Should we check? The tide will take her. By morning, there won't be anything left to find. They were wrong about the tide. The shelf I'd landed on was just high enough to stay dry, even at high water. They were wrong about me being dead too. I was dying, certainly, bleeding out on a cold rock in the middle of the night, unable to move, unable to call for help, but I wasn't dead yet. The voice recorder saved my life in more ways than one. It was in my jacket pocket. A small digital device I'd started carrying 6 months earlier when I first suspected Marcus was cooking the books. I'd recorded dozens of meetings, hundreds of conversations, hoping to find proof of the fraud I knew was happening. What I got instead was a confession to attempted murder. I didn't know the recorder was still running when he pushed me. I didn't know it until much later, in a hospital bed, when I pressed play and heard everything. Marcus's voice, calm and businesslike. Stephanie's laugh, eager and cruel. The sound of my own body hitting rock, and then their conversation, clear as a bell, captured by the device in my pocket. Goodbye, darling. The company is ours now. Those were the last words I heard before the darkness took me. The first thing I heard when I woke up 3 weeks later was a fishing boat captain named Eduardo telling me I was the luckiest woman in the world. Eduardo had been checking his crab pots at dawn when he spotted what he thought was a dead seal on the rocks. He nearly didn't investigate. He nearly turned his boat around and headed back to port. But something made him take a closer look, and what he found was a woman so broken and bloody that he barely recognized her as human. I thought you were dead, he told me later. You had no pulse. Or maybe I just couldn't find it because my hands were shaking so bad. But when I picked you up, you made this sound, like a kitten, and I knew I had to try. He radioed the Coast Guard. They airlifted me to San Francisco General, where I spent the next 4 months learning how to breathe again, how to eat through a straw, how to look in a mirror without screaming. The doctors did what they could. 3 reconstructive surgeries, titanium plates in my cheekbone, skin grafts on my temple. But there's only so much modern medicine can do when half your face has been destroyed by granite. I would never look like Victoria Reed again. I would never look like anyone's wife, anyone's mother, anyone's former colleague. This was the gift Marcus gave me, though he didn't know it. He gave me a new face, a face no one recognized, A face I could hide behind a veil and walk into any room in San Francisco without being stopped. I decided to stay dead on my 37th day in the hospital. That was the day I finally listened to the recording, the day I heard Marcus and Stephanie celebrating my murder. I'd been planning to go to the police. I'd been planning to call my son Christopher to let him know his mother was alive. But when I heard those voices, something in me shifted. The police would arrest Marcus. He'd hire lawyers, the best lawyers, and he'd claim the recording was doctored or taken out of context. He'd post bail. He'd drag the case out for years, and in the end, he might walk free. Men like Marcus often did. But if I stayed dead, if I let him think he'd gotten away with it, I could do something the police couldn't. I could destroy him completely. Not just his freedom, but his company, his reputation, his marriage, his relationship with our son. I could take away everything he'd ever wanted, the same way he'd tried to take away my life. It wasn't justice I wanted. It was revenge. Cold, complete, and devastating. Eduardo helped me disappear. He had contacts, people who didn't ask questions, people who could create new identities for the right price. Within 6 months, I was Victoria Thorne, a wealthy widow from Vancouver with a medical condition that required her to wear a veil in public. I had new documents, new bank accounts, a new life built on the foundation of my own murder. The money came from accounts Marcus didn't know about, accounts I'd set up years ago when I first started suspecting he was having an affair. $2.3 million, squirreled away in offshore accounts, enough to live on while I plan my return. I found Thomas Wright through Eduardo. Thomas was a corporate lawyer who'd been disbarred 15 years ago for helping a client hide assets during a divorce. He'd done his time, paid his debts, and now operated in the gray areas of business law. He was exactly what I needed. Someone smart, ruthless, and motivated by money rather than morals. "You want to buy your own company?" he asked when I explained the plan. "I want to take back what's mine, and I want Marcus to hand it to me without knowing who I am." Thomas smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "That's going to take years." "I have years." I did. I had 6 years of healing, 6 years of planning, 6 years of watching from a distance as Marcus remarried Stephanie, as my son Christopher grew into a man I barely recognized, as Reed Maritime Technologies expanded into new markets and made my husband richer than we'd ever been together. I had 6 years to build the Ghost Group, a network of shell companies and investment funds that looked legitimate on paper, but existed only to serve one purpose: acquiring enough leverage to force Marcus into a sale. I had 6 years to gather evidence of the fraud I'd always suspected, the tax evasion, the embezzlement, the bribes to port officials. I had 6 years to become someone new, someone stronger, someone Marcus would never see coming. And I had 6 years to learn how to live with the face he'd given me, the scars that no surgery could erase, the way strangers looked away when they caught a glimpse behind my veil, the way I caught myself sometimes in a passing window or an unexpected mirror and didn't recognize the woman looking back. Marcus had tried to kill Victoria Reed. He'd succeeded, in a way. The woman who emerged from those rocks, who spent 4 months in a hospital bed and 6 years in hiding, wasn't the same person he'd pushed. She was harder, colder, more patient than Victoria Reed had ever been. She was the ghost who would haunt him, and she was finally ready to be seen. The invitation to the meeting arrived on a Tuesday, 6 years and 3 months after my death. Marcus had finally agreed to sell. The Ghost Group's offer was too good to refuse, especially with federal investigators sniffing around his books. He thought he was cashing out before the walls closed in. He had no idea the walls were me. I set the invitation on my desk and looked at my reflection in the darkened window. A woman in a black veil, her scars hidden but not forgotten. A woman who had waited 2,183 days for this moment. The meeting was scheduled for next Thursday at 2 p.m. Reed Maritime Headquarters, the building Marcus and I had designed together, the building where I'd spent 20 years of my life. I would walk through those doors one more time. and I would show Marcus Reed exactly what he'd created when he pushed me off that cliff. The wedding invitation arrived 3 months after my death. I found it in a stack of mail Thomas had intercepted from my old P.O. box, the one Marcus didn't know about. Cream cardstock, gold embossing, the kind of paper that costs more per sheet than most people spend on groceries. Marcus James Reed and Stephanie Ann Blake request the pleasure of your company at the celebration of their marriage. I read it 7 times. The date was 6 weeks away. The venue was the Ritz-Carlton in Half Moon Bay, 12 miles from the cliff where he'd pushed me. The irony was so perfect it had to be intentional. Marcus was marrying his mistress in the shadow of my murder. I wanted to vomit. I wanted to scream. Instead, I set the invitation aside and continued planning. The first year was the hardest. I was still healing, still learning how to eat solid food without pain, still flinching every time I saw my reflection. Thomas handled the legal work while I focused on recovery. Physical therapy 3 times a week, counseling twice a week, long walks along the Vancouver waterfront, my face hidden behind a veil, my body wrapped in coats that concealed how thin I'd become. I watched the news obsessively. Marcus gave interviews about his late wife, his voice thick with practiced grief. He talked about the hiking accident, the tragic fall, the empty funeral where they'd buried an empty casket. He talked about how Victoria would have wanted him to move forward, to find happiness again. Happiness. He was selling the story of a grieving widower, while the woman he'd murdered was learning how to chew on the left side of her mouth, because the right side was held together with titanium screws. Christopher appeared in some of the interviews. My son, 20 years old, looking lost and confused in a black suit. He'd inherited my dark hair and Marcus's height, but his eyes were pure Victoria, sad eyes, searching eyes, eyes that didn't quite believe the story they were being told. I wanted to reach through the screen and hold him. I wanted to tell him I was alive, that I was coming back, that none of this was his fault, but I couldn't, not yet. If Christopher knew I was alive, Marcus would find out, and if Marcus found out, everything would fall apart. So I watched my son grieve for a mother who wasn't dead, and I added that pain to the account I was keeping, the account Marcus would pay when the time came. The marriage happened on schedule. I watched the coverage on a tablet in my Vancouver apartment, eating takeout from a Thai restaurant and drinking wine that cost more than the dinner. Stephanie wore white, because of course she did. Marcus wore a smile that didn't reach his eyes. They exchanged vows on a terrace overlooking the Pacific, and somewhere below them, invisible in the fog, was the shelf of rock that had saved my life. I turned off the tablet before they kissed. Some things were too much, even for a ghost. The second year was about building. Thomas and I created the Ghost Group one shell company at a time, holding companies in Delaware, investment vehicles in the Caymans, a charitable foundation in Switzerland that existed only on paper. Each entity was legitimate, properly registered, entirely legal. Together, they formed a maze so complex that even the most determined investigator would spend years trying to trace ownership back to me. We started small, a minority stake in a shipping logistics company that did business with Reed Maritime, a partnership with a Korean conglomerate that was expanding into the Pacific Northwest, a seat on the board of a port authority that controlled access to key terminals. Each investment was strategic, designed to position us for the eventual acquisition. Marcus noticed the Ghost Group eventually. He couldn't help but notice. We were everywhere his business was, a silent partner in deals that should have been exclusively his. His lawyers sent inquiries. His investigators dug for information. They found exactly what I wanted them to find. A wealthy consortium of international investors with deep pockets and aggressive expansion plans. What they didn't find was Victoria Reed. Because Victoria Reed was dead, the third year brought an unexpected complication. Christopher left Reed Maritime. I learned about it through the corporate filings Thomas monitored. A formal resignation effective immediately. No explanation. No public statement. One day he was VP of operations. The next he was gone. I couldn't risk contacting him directly, but I could hire a private investigator. A woman named Sandra Chen who specialized in discreet surveillance. She followed Christopher for 3 months and reported back with a picture I hadn't expected. My son had moved out of the family home. He was living in a small apartment in the Mission District, working as a consultant for a maritime environmental nonprofit. He'd grown a beard and stopped wearing suits. And according to Sandra, he'd been asking questions about his mother's death. He hired a detective, Sandra told me. Guy named Morrison, retired SFPD. Your son doesn't believe the official story. My heart stopped. What does Morrison know? Nothing yet, but he's good. If there's something to find, he'll find it. I spent 2 weeks debating what to do. If Morrison found me, the whole plan would collapse. But if I intervened, if I tried to stop the investigation, I might alert Marcus. And Christopher deserved the truth. He deserved to know his mother was alive. In the end, I did nothing. I let the investigation proceed, trusting that my new face and new identity would be enough to stay hidden. It was a gamble, but I'd been gambling since the moment I decided to stay dead. Morrison never found me. He came close once, interviewing Eduardo about the rescue, but Eduardo kept my secret. The fisherman had become a friend by then. One of the few people who knew Victoria Thorne was really Victoria Reed. He told Morrison that the woman he'd rescued had died in the hospital. It wasn't entirely a lie. The woman he'd rescued had died. Someone new had taken her place. The 4th year was about patience. The Ghost Group's investments matured. Our stake in Reed Maritime's supply chain grew. Marcus was making mistakes now, cooking the books more aggressively to cover debts I'd helped create. He didn't know it, but every loan he took, every corner he cut, was part of my design. I attended a shareholders meeting that year, my first time back in San Francisco since the cliff. I wore the veil I'd worn for 3 years, the one that covered everything below my eyes. I sat in the back row and watched Marcus present quarterly results that I knew were fabricated. He was charming, confident, the same salesman who'd convinced me to marry him 23 years ago. He didn't recognize me. Why would he? The woman he'd killed was dead. The woman in the veil was just another investor, another anonymous face in a sea of stockholders, but I recognized him. I recognized every gesture, every inflection, every lie, and I added them all to the account. The 5th year brought Detective Maria Santos. She'd been assigned to my case years ago, when the Coast Guard had briefly treated my disappearance as suspicious. The investigation had gone nowhere. Marcus's story was airtight, but Santos had never closed the file. Something about the case bothered her. Something she couldn't quite articulate. She started making calls again, reopening interviews, reviewing evidence. Thomas tracked her movements through contacts in the department. She was getting closer than anyone had before, asking questions about the exact location of my hiking accident, about the timing, about inconsistencies in Marcus's timeline. I considered revealing myself to her. A police detective with doubts could be a powerful ally, but Santos was by the book, honest to a fault. If she knew I was alive, she'd insist on doing things properly. Arrests, trials, the whole legal machinery, and Marcus's lawyers would find ways to delay, to suppress, to confuse. When I returned, it would be on my terms, in a boardroom, not a courtroom, with an audience that included everyone Marcus had ever tried to impress. The 6th year was preparation. The Ghost Group made its move, a formal acquisition offer for Reed Maritime Technologies, $847 million in cash and assumed debt, significantly above market value. Marcus would be a fool to refuse. He wasn't a fool. He was desperate. The federal investigation Thomas had been quietly feeding information to was closing in. The fraudulent accounting I'd helped expose through anonymous tips was about to become public. Marcus needed to sell before the walls collapsed. He accepted our offer in a single phone call. He didn't negotiate, didn't counter, didn't ask questions. He just said yes. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. Final signatures, transfer of ownership, a ceremonial handshake between the old guard and the new. Marcus would walk away with a check. I would walk away with everything else. I spent the week before the meeting practicing, standing in front of a mirror, lifting the veil, watching my own face emerge, the scars and the titanium and the years of waiting. I practiced what I would say. I practiced how I would move. I practiced the moment when recognition would dawn in Marcus's eyes, and he would understand exactly who had been hunting him all along. 6 years, 2,283 days, 54,792 hours of planning and patience and pain. The ghost was ready to be seen. I watched Christopher from across the street, a ghost observing her son through a coffee shop window. He was sitting alone at a corner table, laptop open, beard fuller than the last time I'd seen him. 26 years old now, a man, a stranger who shared my blood but not my life. The nonprofit where he worked was 3 blocks away. He came to this coffee shop every Tuesday and Thursday, ordered the same thing, a large black coffee and a blueberry muffin, and spent 2 hours answering emails. Sandra Chen's reports had included these details, but reading about a routine wasn't the same as watching it unfold. My son was methodical, careful. He typed with 2 fingers, the same way I did. He frowned at the screen the same way I frowned at spreadsheets. He was so much like me that it hurt to look at him, to know that I was standing 50 feet away and he had no idea. I could end this now. I could walk across the street, sit down at his table, and tell him everything. Mom's alive. Dad tried to kill me. I've been watching you for 3 years. But I didn't. I couldn't. Not yet. The plan required 1 more week. 1 more week of silence, 1 more week of waiting, and then I would have Marcus exactly where I wanted him. If I revealed myself to Christopher now, he'd confront his father. He'd demand answers. And Marcus would realize something was wrong, would smell the trap, would find some way to escape. I'd waited 6 years. I could wait 1 more week, but I couldn't stop myself from watching. Every Tuesday and Thursday, the same coffee shop, the same window seat, where I could see without being seen. My veil made me invisible, just another eccentric woman with a medical condition. Nobody looked twice. Nobody wondered why I spent hours staring at a young man who didn't know I existed. Christopher closed his laptop at 3:15, the same time he always did. He gathered his things, left a tip for the barista, and walked out into the San Francisco afternoon. I followed at a distance, keeping half a block between us until he turned onto Valencia and disappeared into the nonprofit's modest storefront, Maritime Environmental Watch. That was where my son worked now, fighting for the ocean his father had been polluting for profit. The irony was almost too perfect. Christopher had rejected everything Marcus stood for without knowing the full extent of his father's crimes. I wondered what he would think when he learned the truth. Would he be relieved that his suspicions were justified? Would he be angry that I'd stayed hidden so long? Would he forgive me for the years of silence, for watching from a distance while he grieved for a mother who wasn't dead? These were the questions that kept me awake at night. These, and the memory of his face at my funeral, 20 years old and devastated, standing beside a man who had murdered me just 3 weeks before. I took a cab back to my hotel, a boutique property in Pacific Heights that catered to wealthy guests who valued discretion. The staff knew me as Ms. Thorne, a Canadian widow with facial scarring from a car accident. They never asked questions. They never looked too closely at the veil. They just provided excellent service and pretended not to notice when I ordered room service at 3 a.m. because I couldn't sleep. Thomas was waiting in the lobby. He stood when he saw me, a folder tucked under his arm, his expression carefully neutral. "We have a problem," he said. My stomach dropped. "What kind of problem?" "Not here." We went up to my suite, a corner room with views of the bay and enough security features to satisfy even my paranoia. Thomas waited until the door was closed and locked before he spoke. Marcus hired new security, a firm called Whitehall Associates. They specialize in executive protection and threat assessment. He's scared. He should be. The federal investigation is accelerating. They've subpoenaed records from 3 of his offshore accounts. But that's not the problem. Then what is? Thomas opened the folder and handed me a photograph. A woman in her mid-40s, dark hair, professional suit, sharp eyes that seemed to look directly at the camera. Maria Santos, SFPD Cold Case Unit. She's been digging into your death again. Whitehall flagged her as a potential threat and added her to the meeting security protocol. She'll be at the meeting. Outside, monitoring entrances and exits. If she sees anything suspicious, she'll investigate. I studied the photograph. Santos looked competent, determined, the kind of detective who didn't give up easily. Is she a problem? She could be. If she recognizes you, if she connects Victoria Thorne to Victoria Reed, she'll arrest you for fraud before you can finish your statement. I'm not committing fraud. I'm reclaiming what was stolen from me. Try explaining that to a detective who thinks you faked your death to collect insurance money. He had a point. I'd been so focused on Marcus that I'd forgotten about the legal complications of resurrection. Victoria Reed had been declared dead 6 years ago. Her life insurance had been paid out. Her estate had been settled. By every legal standard, I was a ghost. And ghosts weren't allowed to own companies or confront their murderers in public. What do you suggest? Thomas sat down on the couch, the folder balanced on his knee. We have 2 options. First, we postpone the meeting until Santos is no longer involved. That could take months, maybe years. Second, we proceed as planned and deal with the consequences afterward. I'm not waiting months. I'm not waiting years. I've waited 6 years already. Then we proceed, but you need to understand what you're risking. If this goes wrong, if Santos arrests you, Marcus's lawyers will have a field day. They'll argue that you staged the whole thing, that you've been manipulating stock prices, that the Ghost Group is a criminal enterprise. And if it goes right? Thomas smiled, the same not nice smile he'd given me 6 years ago when I first explained the plan. If it goes right, Marcus goes to prison, you get your company back, and Santos becomes the detective who solved the biggest attempted murder case in San Francisco history. She'll be too busy giving interviews to worry about insurance fraud. I looked out the window at the bay, at the water that Marcus had tried to make my grave. Somewhere out there, beyond the Golden Gate, was the cliff where everything had changed. The rocks that had broken my face, the shelf that had saved my life. We proceed, I said, as planned. Thomas nodded. I'll handle the security arrangements. Santos will be outside the building, not inside. By the time she realizes what's happening, it'll be too late to stop it. He left with the folder, already making calls, already adjusting plans. I stayed by the window, watching the lights of the city flicker on as the sun went down. 1 week. 7 days until I walked into Reed Maritime's headquarters and showed Marcus what he'd created. 7 days until I lifted my veil and watched his face change from confusion to recognition to terror. 7 days until Victoria Reed came back from the dead. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Mom, I know you're watching me. I've known for weeks. We need to talk. Coffee shop tomorrow, 2 p.m. Please. I stared at the message, my heart pounding. Christopher, my son, had found me. He'd known I was following him, known I was alive, and he'd waited. He'd waited until now, until the week before the meeting, to reach out. I typed and deleted a dozen responses. Finally, I settled on 5 words. I'll be there. I'm sorry. The reply came immediately. Don't be sorry. Be ready to explain everything. Tomorrow. I would see my son tomorrow. I would tell him the truth. And then, together, we would face his father. The ghost was about to become real again. The coffee shop felt different now. I wasn't watching from across the street. I was sitting at Christopher's usual table, my veil in place, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea I couldn't drink. Every time the door opened, my heart stopped. Every time it wasn't him, I started breathing again. He arrived at 2:07, exactly 7 minutes late. I recognized his walk before I recognized his face, the same confident stride his grandfather had, the same way of holding his shoulders back like he was ready for a fight. He spotted me immediately and crossed the room without hesitation. Mom, he said it quietly, almost a whisper. His eyes were wet. It's really you. I couldn't speak. 6 years of imagining this moment, 6 years of rehearsing what I would say, and now that he was standing in front of me, words had abandoned me completely. Christopher sat down across the table. He didn't reach for my hand. He didn't try to hug me. He just sat there, looking at me. taking in the veil and the visible scars and the stranger's face that had replaced his mother's. "How long have you known?" I finally asked. 3 months. I hired a detective, Frank Morrison. He found Eduardo, the fisherman who pulled you out of the water. Eduardo wouldn't talk at first, but eventually he admitted that you'd survived, that you'd been living under a different name. "Why didn't you contact me sooner?" "Because I wanted to understand why you'd hidden from me." His voice was steady, but I could hear the hurt underneath. "I spent 6 years thinking you were dead. 6 years grieving for a mother who was alive the whole time. I needed to know why before I could face you." I lifted my veil. Christopher flinched, then forced himself to look. The scars were worse in person than in photographs, worse in daylight than in the careful lighting of my hotel room. I let him see everything: the titanium plates, the skin grafts, the face his father had destroyed. "This is why," I said. "This, and the recording." "What recording?" I pulled out my phone and pressed play. The audio filled the space between us. Marcus's voice gravelly and cold, Stephanie's laugh high and bright, the sound of pushing, the sound of falling, the sound of celebration while a woman bled on rocks 300 feet below. "Goodbye, darling. The company is ours now." Christopher's face went white. He listened to the entire recording, 5 minutes and 47 seconds of horror, without moving. When it finished, he picked up my phone and played it again, and again, and again. "He tried to kill you," he said finally. It wasn't a question. "He succeeded, in a way. The woman you knew as your mother died on those rocks. What came back was someone different. And you've been hiding for 6 years? Planning this whole thing? The ghost group, the acquisition, all of it?" "All of it." Christopher set down the phone. His hands were shaking. "Why didn't you go to the police? Why didn't you just have him arrested?" "Because arrest isn't enough." I reached across the table and took his hand. It was warm, alive, familiar in a way that made me want to cry. "Your father took everything from me. My company, my marriage, my face, my life. An arrest, a trial, maybe a few years in prison? That's not justice. That's a slap on the wrist for attempted murder. So what is justice? Justice is watching him lose everything he stole from me. Justice is being the one who takes it away. Justice is seeing his face when he realizes that the woman he killed is the one who destroyed him." Christopher was quiet for a long moment. I could see him processing, weighing, deciding. He'd spent 20 years as Marcus Reed's son. He'd believed the lies, defended the image, built a career in his father's shadow. Now all of that was crumbling. "He's been lying to me my whole life," Christopher said finally. "About everything. About you. About the company. About who he is. I know. I left the company 2 years ago. I couldn't stand being part of it anymore. The fraud, the corruption, the way he treated people. I didn't know about you, but I knew something was wrong. I could feel it. You were right to leave. I should have left sooner. I should have asked more questions. I should have— Stop." I squeezed his hand. "You were a child when he married me. You were barely an adult when he tried to kill me. None of this is your fault." But I believed him. I believed the grieving widower act. I stood next to him at your funeral and I believed every word. He's a good liar. He fooled me for 23 years. Christopher wiped his eyes. He was crying now, silent tears that he didn't try to hide. I hadn't seen him cry since he was 12, when his grandmother died. Marcus had told him that men don't cry, that emotion was weakness, that control was everything. Marcus had been wrong about a lot of things. "What happens now?" Christopher asked. "Now I tell you about the meeting, and then you decide if you want to be there." I explained the plan. The ghost group's acquisition. The meeting on Thursday. The moment when I would lift my veil and place the recording on the table. Thomas had arranged for FBI agents to be waiting in the lobby, ready to make arrests once the confession was public. Detective Santos would be outside, monitoring the building. Everyone Marcus had ever worked with would be in that room, watching as his empire collapsed. "It's going to be ugly," I warned. "The media will cover every detail. Your name will be mentioned. People will ask questions about what you knew, when you knew it." "I don't care about the media." "You should." This will follow you for the rest of your life. Christopher shook his head. 6 years ago, I lost my mother. I thought she died in a hiking accident. A tragedy, just bad luck. But it wasn't. It was murder. My father tried to kill you, and he's been lying to me every day since. If being in that room means watching him finally face justice, then I'll deal with the consequences. Are you sure? I'm sure. He looked at me with eyes that were equal parts pain and determination. I want to be there when you take back what's yours. I want Dad to see both of us. I want him to know that he didn't just lose the company, he lost his family. I started to cry then, something I hadn't done in years. The tears stung my scars, ran down the damaged skin, dripped onto the table between us. Christopher reached across and took both my hands. I missed you, Mom. I missed you so much. I missed you too, every day, every hour. There were nights I almost called, almost showed up at your apartment, almost ended the whole plan just so I could see you again. Why didn't you? Because I wanted to give you something better than a traumatized mother hiding from the police. I wanted to give you justice. I wanted to give you the truth. The truth. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. The truth is that my father is a murderer and my mother is a ghost. That's going to take some getting used to. We have time. After Thursday, we'll have all the time in the world. We talked for 3 more hours. I told him everything, the rescue, the surgeries, the years of planning. He told me about leaving the company, about the nonprofit, about the guilt he'd carried for not questioning his father's story. We ordered more coffee. We ordered food we barely touched. We sat in that corner booth and rebuilt something that Marcus had tried to destroy. By the time we left, it was dark outside. Christopher walked me to my cab, a protective gesture that reminded me of his grandfather. Before I got in, he hugged me, carefully, gently, like he was afraid I might break. "I'll see you Thursday," he said. Thursday. I watched him walk away, his tall figure disappearing into the San Francisco night. My son, my ally, my reason for surviving those rocks 6 years ago. In 3 days, we would face Marcus together. In 3 days, the ghost would become real again. I just had to make it through 3 more nights of waiting. The conference room was exactly as I remembered it. Same mahogany table, same leather chairs, same floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. I'd helped design this room 20 years ago, picked out the art on the walls, chosen the exact shade of blue for the carpet. Marcus had always taken credit for the aesthetics. I'd let him. It didn't seem important at the time. Now I was standing in the doorway, my veil in place, watching Marcus arrange papers at the head of the table. He was grayer than I remembered, thicker around the middle, but still carrying himself like a man who owned the room. Stephanie sat beside him, her blonde hair perfect, her nails freshly manicured, a diamond bracelet catching the light every time she moved. They didn't notice me at first. They were too busy reviewing documents, whispering to each other, playing the role of the powerful couple they'd always wanted to be. Thomas stood at the far end of the table, pretending to check his phone, while actually confirming that our people were in position. 2 FBI agents in the lobby, Detective Santos monitoring the parking garage entrance, Christopher in a coffee shop across the street waiting for my signal. Thorne. Marcus's voice boomed across the room as he finally looked up. "Welcome. Please, have a seat." I walked to the chair Thomas had designated, directly across from Marcus. The mahogany was cool under my fingertips. The leather creaked as I sat down. "Thank you for accommodating this meeting, Mr. Reed. The Ghost Group is very pleased with the terms." Marcus smiled, the same charming smile that had convinced me to marry him all those years ago. "It's a fair price, generous even. I appreciate that your consortium recognizes the value of what we've built here. What we've built. As if Stephanie had been anything more than a pretty distraction. As if he'd ever acknowledged my contributions when I was alive. "The company has an impressive track record," I said. My voice was steady, controlled, betraying nothing. 27 years of consistent growth, innovative technology, strong relationships with port authorities around the Pacific Rim. All under my leadership. Marcus leaned back in his chair, expansive and confident. Victoria, my late wife, she handled the finances, but the vision was always mine. I felt Thomas stiffen beside me. We'd practiced for this moment, prepared for the possibility that Marcus would mention me. But hearing him say my name, hearing him reduce 2 decades of partnership to handling the finances, was harder than I'd expected. "Tell me about your wife," I said. "I understand she passed away tragically." The flicker in Marcus's eyes was almost imperceptible. Almost. "Yes, 6 years ago. A hiking accident. She fell from a cliff near Half Moon Bay. How terrible." "It was. But life goes on." He gestured at Stephanie, who smiled on cue. "My current wife has been an incredible support. Together, we've taken the company to new heights." "I'm sure she has." Stephanie preened at the compliment, oblivious to the irony. She'd been Marcus's mistress for 2 years before he pushed me off that cliff. She'd been there that night, laughing as I fell, celebrating as I bled. Now she was wearing diamonds paid for with the company I'd helped build. I wondered how she would look in prison orange. Thomas cleared his throat. "If we could proceed to the contracts? Thorne has another engagement this afternoon." Of course. Marcus slid a folder across the table. "Everything is in order. Just need your signature on pages 7, 12, and 23. I didn't touch the folder. Instead, I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. The voice recorder. The same device that had been in my pocket 6 years ago. The same device that had captured everything. "Before we proceed, Mr. Reed, there's something you should hear." Marcus frowned. "What is this?" "Consider it due diligence." I pressed play. The first few seconds were static. The rustle of fabric, the sound of wind. Then Marcus's voice, clear and unmistakable. "Are you sure about this?" Stephanie's reply. "I've never been more sure of anything. Do it." More wind, footsteps on gravel. Then my own voice, confused and distant. "Marcus? Why are we stopping here? It's getting dark." "I just wanted to see the sunset one more time. Come here, darling." "Stand by the edge." The room had gone completely silent. Marcus was staring at the recorder, his face draining of color. Stephanie had stopped smiling. Her manicured fingers were gripping the arm of her chair so hard I could see the tendons standing out. The recording continued. "That's far enough. Perfect view, isn't it?" "Marcus, I don't understand." "Goodbye, darling. The company is ours now." The sound of pushing, the sound of falling, my own scream cut short by impact. And then, the part they didn't know existed. Is she dead? 300 feet onto rocks. She's dead. Are you sure? Push her harder. She's still moving. The tide will take her. By morning, there won't be anything left to find. Laughter, celebration, the sound of car doors closing, an engine starting, tires on gravel. I stopped the recording. Marcus was frozen. His gold pen had fallen from his fingers, rolling slowly across the polished mahogany until it came to rest against the edge of the folder. His mouth was open, but no sound came out. "That's impossible," Stephanie whispered. "She died. She fell. We watched her." She stopped herself too late. The admission hung in the air, damning and irreversible. I lifted my veil. The scars were worse in the harsh fluorescent light of the conference room. Every seam, every graft, every piece of titanium holding my face together was visible. I saw Marcus recoil. I saw Stephanie's hand fly to her mouth. I saw my own reflection in the window behind them, a monster made of what remained. "Hello, darling." I used his own words against him, the same gravelly endearment he'd used before the push. "Did you miss me?" Marcus stood so fast his chair fell backward. "This is a trick. You're not Victoria. Victoria is dead. I watched her. You watched me fall. You didn't watch me die." I stood as well, facing him across the table that I'd designed. I landed on a shelf of rock. A fisherman found me at dawn. I spent 4 months in the hospital and 6 years planning this moment. You can't prove anything. That recording, it could be faked. Deepfake technology, voice synthesis. The FBI's audio forensics lab has already authenticated it. They've been building a case for months. They're in the lobby right now, waiting for my signal. Marcus looked at the door, at Stephanie, at me. I could see the calculations happening, the desperate search for an escape route that didn't exist. Christopher, he said suddenly. Christopher will vouch for me. He knows I would never. Christopher is across the street. He's been in contact with me for a week. He's heard the recording. He knows exactly what you did to his mother. The door to the conference room opened. Christopher walked in, his face set in an expression I recognized from my own mirror. Cold, determined, ready, Dad. He didn't extend his hand. He didn't move closer. He just stood there, a witness to his father's unraveling. The FBI is ready. They asked me to tell you that you have the right to remain silent. Marcus lunged for the side door, the one that led to his private office. Thomas was faster. He'd been waiting for exactly this moment, positioning himself to block the only escape route. Marcus slammed into him, stumbled backward, fell against the conference table. It's over, I said. 6 years over. Stephanie was crying now, mascara running down her perfect face, diamonds trembling on her wrist. I didn't push her. I wasn't even close. Marcus is the one who... Push her harder. She's still moving. I quoted her own words back to her. The recording has your voice, Stephanie. You'll be charged as an accessory to attempted murder. If Marcus's lawyers are good, you might avoid conspiracy charges, but I wouldn't count on it. The door opened again. 2 FBI agents in suits, badges visible, handcuffs ready. Marcus Reed? Stephanie Blake? You're under arrest for the attempted murder of Victoria Reed. They read the rights. They applied the cuffs. They led my former husband and his mistress out of the conference room in full view of the executives who had gathered in the hallway. Drawn by the commotion, I watched them go. Marcus looked back once, his eyes meeting mine, and I saw something I'd never seen in 23 years of marriage. Fear. Real fear. Not the calculated concern he'd shown at my funeral. Not the practiced grief of his interviews. Pure animal terror at the knowledge that the woman he'd tried to kill was standing alive in front of him, holding the weapon that would destroy everything he'd built. The door closed behind them. The room fell silent. I picked up the gold pen Marcus had dropped, a gift I'd given him for our 20th anniversary, engraved with his initials. I'd chosen it at a jewelry store in Paris, spent an hour deciding on the exact inscription. To MR, with love always, VR. I dropped it in the trash on my way out. The trial lasted 14 months. Marcus hired the best defense attorneys money could buy, but even the best couldn't explain away his own voice on a recording that had been authenticated by 3 separate forensic labs. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts: attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, a dozen other charges that had emerged once the FBI started digging. Stephanie testified against him in exchange for a reduced sentence. She'd been cooperative from the moment the cuffs went on, trading information for leniency with the desperation of someone who'd never faced consequences before. Her testimony confirmed everything the recording suggested: the affair, the planning, the decision to kill me for the company. She got 8 years. With good behavior, she'd be out in 5. Marcus got 42. I watched the sentencing from the gallery, my veil finally removed, my scars visible to everyone in the courtroom. The media had been covering the case for months. The ghost wife of San Francisco, they called me. Victoria Reed, the woman who rose from the dead to destroy her would-be murderer. I'd given exactly 2 interviews, controlled statements that said what I wanted people to know, and nothing more. Detective Maria Santos sat beside me during the verdict. She'd closed her cold case file the day of the arrests, then spent the next year testifying about the inconsistencies she'd always suspected. We'd become something like friends in the process, 2 women who refused to let the truth stay buried. "How do you feel?" she asked as the bailiffs led Marcus away. I thought about the question. How did I feel? Triumphant? Vindicated? At peace? None of those words quite fit. I feel finished, I said finally. Whatever comes next, at least this part is done. What came next was more complicated than I'd expected. The company was mine again, legally and fully. But taking over a business you'd been dead to for 6 years wasn't simple. There were board meetings, shareholder concerns, regulatory inquiries. Thomas stayed on as my primary legal advisor. Christopher joined the executive team, bringing with him the environmental focus he'd developed at the nonprofit. We rebuilt Reed Maritime Technologies from the ground up. New leadership, new values, new commitment to the sustainable practices Christopher had always championed. The company that Marcus had turned into a vehicle for fraud became something I could finally be proud of. The settlement from Marcus's frozen assets went to a foundation I'd created, the Victoria Reed Foundation for Domestic Violence Survivors. We funded shelters, legal aid, counseling services, escape plans for women trapped in marriages that were slowly killing them. I'd been lucky. I'd had Eduardo, had money hidden away, had the resources to plan my own resurrection. Most victims didn't have any of that. The foundation gave them options I wished I'd had. Christopher and I had dinner together every Sunday, a tradition we'd started during the trial and continued after. He'd moved into an apartment near the foundation's offices, close enough that we could walk to each other's places, far enough that we maintained independent lives. He was dating someone now, a marine biologist he'd met at a conference. She reminded me of myself at that age, smart and driven and utterly unaware of the compromises that lay ahead. I hoped she'd never have to learn them the way I did. The scars never fully healed. Doctors said they could do more surgery, minimize the damage, make me look more normal. I declined. The face Marcus had given me was the face I'd earned. Every line, every graft, every piece of titanium was a reminder of what I'd survived. I wore it openly now. No veil, no hiding. Let people stare. Let them wonder. Let them see what a woman could endure and still come back fighting. 1 year after the conviction, I returned to the cliff. Eduardo drove me, the same fisherman who'd pulled me from the rocks 6 years earlier. He was retired now, living comfortably on a pension the ghost group had quietly arranged. He'd never asked for payment. He'd never wanted recognition. He'd just wanted to know that the woman he'd saved had found something worth living for. We parked at the same overlook where Marcus had stopped that night. The same gravel lot, the same view of the ocean, the same 300-foot drop to the rocks below. I walked to the edge and looked down. The shelf that had saved my life was visible at low tide, a narrow ledge of granite jutting out from the cliff face. From up here, it looked impossibly small. A miracle that I'd hit it at all. A bigger miracle that I'd survived the impact. "What are you thinking?" Eduardo asked. I watched the waves crash against the rocks, the same waves that Marcus had expected to carry away my body, the same water that had witnessed my death and my rebirth. I'm thinking about what I would tell her, the woman who fell, the woman who lay bleeding on those rocks, not knowing if she'd survive. What would you tell her? I considered the question. There was so much I could say. About the pain that was coming, the surgeries and the recovery and the years of isolation. About the plan that would consume her life, the obsessive focus on revenge that would keep her going when nothing else could. About the trial, the conviction, the moment when Marcus finally understood what he'd created when he pushed her. But in the end, only one thing mattered. I'd tell her it was worth it, I said. Every day of hiding, every hour of pain, every moment of doubt. It was all worth it. Eduardo nodded. He didn't need to ask why. He'd seen me at my lowest, bleeding and broken on a rock in the middle of the night. He'd watched me rebuild myself, piece by piece, until I was strong enough to face the man who'd tried to kill me. We stood there for a long time, watching the sunset paint the water gold and orange and finally dark blue. The same sunset Marcus and I had watched 100 times during our marriage. The same sunset he'd used as cover for my murder. I pulled out my phone and typed a message to Christopher. "Dinner tomorrow? I want to talk about the foundation's expansion plans." His reply came immediately. See you at 7. Love you, Mom. Love you, Mom. 3 words that had been impossible 6 years ago. 3 words that made everything else worthwhile. I put away the phone and took one last look at the cliff. The rocks below were dark now, invisible in the gathering dusk. Somewhere down there was the shelf that had saved me. Somewhere down there was the place where Victoria Reed had died and Victoria Thorne had been born. Both of them were gone now. The ghost and the victim had served their purposes. What remained was simply Victoria, a woman with scars and a company and a son who loved her. A woman who had walked through fire and come out the other side. I turned away from the cliff and walked back to the car. Eduardo was waiting, engine running, ready to take me home. Home. A word that had meant nothing for 6 years. A word that finally meant something again. I got in the car and didn't look back. The sun was setting over San Francisco when we arrived. The lights of the city were coming on, thousands of windows glowing in the darkness, thousands of lives being lived. My life was one of them now, not hiding, not planning, not waiting for revenge, just living. I thanked Eduardo and went inside. The apartment was quiet, familiar, filled with books and art, and the scent of the lavender candles I'd grown to love during my recovery. On the desk by the window, next to the laptop where I worked on foundation business, was a photograph in a silver frame. Christopher and me, taken 3 months ago at a charity gala. Both of us smiling, both of us alive, both of us finally free. I picked up the photograph and studied our faces. My scars were visible, as they always would be. Christopher's hand was on my shoulder, protective and proud. We looked like a family. We were a family. Marcus was in prison. Stephanie was in prison. The company was thriving. The foundation was growing. And I was standing in my own apartment, looking at a photograph of my son, knowing that tomorrow I would see him for dinner, and the day after that I would go to work, and the day after that I would keep building the life I'd almost lost. I set down the photograph and went to bed. For the first time in 6 years, I slept without dreaming of the fall.